Okay, I joined the fire service in 1979. Back in those days, people were just experimenting with wood stoves and decided that this was a lot cheaper than oil or gas, and they started burning down their houses. We probably had a dozen, 15 house fires in a year. Nowadays, we get maybe one or two. So it was a much higher incidence of fires, and I would guess that in the first 5 years that I was in the fire service, I fought more structure fires than I have ever since. In any event, back in those days, we had very limited supplies of air. Madison County, where I was a member of the Hamilton Fire Department, I still am. Madison County is where Hamilton is, and they had one air truck. It was typically on the north side of the county, and so if we had a structure fire and called for it, we still couldn't get a lot of air very soon. We had old packs, heavy packs. Um, they were on demand masks. They weren't positive pressure masks. There were lots of things that were different in those days. Uh, Bottom line is, when we thought we could get away without using air, we did. We would turn our air off, take the mask off, and do whatever we needed to do. Okay, so let's fast forward to around October 2013. I had a nagging sore throat. Wasn't bad sore throat, wasn't anything that I did very much about, but I always was wondering whether I was coming down with a cold and would take more vitamin C and whatever. And I saw on the web that Michael Douglas had just been treated for throat cancer and was telling people who had persistent sore throats to go get it checked out. So I did. And I went to see an ENT, ear, nose, and throat guy, and he looked at me and felt my neck and stuck that thing down my nose and said that he was concerned mostly about a swollen lymph node that I had on the side of my neck. And he said, well, we ought to do a biopsy. And I said, okay. It was about October 20th or something like that, 2013. I go get a CAT scan and all that jazz first. Then I go in and I get a biopsy. And it turns out that this was more than what he expected. He ended up taking out much of that lymph node but couldn't get it all, and ended up telling me that I had a squamous cell carcinoma. I had an oral pharyngeal cancer, uh, and we needed to treat that probably the sooner the better. And from that moment on, the treatment I got was just outstanding. He referred me to a doctor in Cornell. I'm also a mutual aid member in the A.E. Crandall Fire Company in Alfred, New York, where I work, and that's where I had all my treatment. And so anyway, he referred me to an oncologist who then said, "Oh, we're going to fix you. We're going to cure you," which I liked hearing. That was good news. And then it turned out that he was going to give me three seriously big doses of chemotherapy with cisplatin, which is the most heavy duty drug that they have, and those are going to be separated by 3 weeks each. And then he was going to zap me with radiation 35 times, 7 weeks of 5 days a week. And I said, okay. I didn't know what I was getting into, but anyway, I did. Um, we started before Christmas, went right over the Christmas holidays. It was great that everybody came in and worked on me. Uh, the chemo is the same chemo that lots of people suffer through. It's just horrendous. I don't recommend it to anybody unless you've got cancer. Those are the only people that qualify, so there you go. Um, you get this dose of drugs. You sit in a chair for 4 or 5 hours, and they infuse you with cisplatin, which is the chemo agent. But then they give you lots of other drugs to keep you from getting too sick. And while you're sitting in the chair, there's some kind of happy juice in that fluid that they pump into you. So you're all in a good mood. You're sitting there with a bunch of other folks, typically your same age, and chatting and have a good time for 4 or 5 hours. And then you go home. The next day you start to feel a little worse, and then the next day after that it just clobbers you. You feel terrible you really feel awful for the first week. Then there's the second week, you're starting to feel halfway human. The third week, as soon as you start feeling really human, they zap you again. So every 3 weeks you go back in, you get zapped again, and it isn't fun. But then in the meantime, just to make sure that you're not forgetting that you're supposed to be sick, they zap you with radiation. So how do they do that? Well, they make this mask, they fit this to you, and you put this mask on every day, and it locks right down on your face so that you can't move a muscle in your head, and they screw that down onto the board that you're lying on your back on, and then they zap you with radiation. And the idea is that way they can find exactly where they want to zap you, and the whole deal is actually kind of clever. Okay, so you're locked into that thing so that your head is in the same place it was yesterday and last week. And then they zap, hopefully, the cancer, and don't zap, hopefully, the rest of you. In order to hit my cancer, they had to take out most of my salivary glands. I still have some left, but it's not much. And you do that. A lot of people go in for radiation and they say there's nothing to it. It's 5 minutes and then they leave again. But with this kind of oral pharyngeal cancer, it was 25 minutes each time, every 5 days a week, 7 weeks. You get into a routine. The radiation itself isn't painful. You don't even know it. It's just sort of annoying to have to lie that still with your head locked down for a while. But in the end, that part wasn't bad. The problem is that they're killing a lot of tissue. That's the whole point of it. And killing that tissue means that your body wants to regrow tissue, and that just zaps your energy. While I was getting that radiation, there was one day, my wife, who stuck by me through the whole thing and was terrific, one day she clocked I was sleeping 23 hours out of the day. I got up for a total of 1 hour that whole day. So it's exhausting. That part isn't particularly unpleasant. The chemo is very unpleasant. And I'll tell you right now, I don't think of myself as a cancer survivor. I think of myself as a cancer treatment survivor because other than the possible exception of being born, and I don't remember that, this was the most unpleasant experience in my life. No question. So I don't recommend it. I think that what you should do, what everyone in the fire service should do, is to try and prevent getting cancer by washing your gear, wearing your SCBA all the time or almost all the time whenever you're near smoke. Okay, and so for me, I'm sure that the riskiest thing I did was overhaul. And we never washed our gear either, this whole culture of having dirty coats. My solution to the problem, which I think is pretty straightforward, is that the accountability officer allowing you to go into a structure fire looks at your gear, and if it's dirty, says, well, I mean, when you first get there, okay, if you've been working at that fire, it's all right. If it's dirty, says, no, you go to the back of the line, we'll let somebody in that has a clean coat, and then firefighters will keep their coats nice and clean. I'm not sure if that would ever happen. So the Michael Douglas thing is a little bit complicated because the way he got cancer was with HPV. I was tested. I tested negative for HPV. So there's something else caused my cancer, and I have a strong feeling that it was being exposed to a lot of smoke. I never smoked a cigarette or a joint for that matter in my life, so it's probably smoke from being a firefighter. But the other thing that I would say, when it's all is said and done, is that were I to look back on it, thinking about young folks that are getting started in the fire service now, when I compare it to other activities that young people do, playing football is the one that comes to my mind. I never played football, but I know a lot of people my age who are more or less crippled one way or another because of, quote, old football injuries. And when you talk to them and you say, hey, if you had to do it again, would you have not played football? None of them would say that. They all say, no, I would play football, but the equipment is so much better today that people don't get hurt so much. And I would say the same thing about the fire service. If I had to look at it, go back and say, okay, would I have not been a firefighter just because I got cancer from? No way. It was and still is an important part of my life. It was a real important part of my life. My son grew up thinking I was a firefighter. He didn't know I had another job. He didn't know I was a volunteer. Figured, well, that's what my dad does. He's a firefighter. So it's always been a part of my identity, part of who I want to be, who I am. And I know that there's nothing like going into a fire, a structure fire, with a good, effective team and knocking it down and saving a house. The rewards that we get from it are difficult for anyone who hasn't done it to understand. And I assume that's the same with playing football. If you've never played football and you wonder about how these guys are hurting themselves and what they're going to be like 20, 50 years from now, of course it's dangerous and of course it's got risks. But what we can do is minimize them to the extent possible. And right now we've got all this equipment. It's hugely expensive, and it's crazy not to, first of all, wear it when you should be wearing it, and second of all, keep it clean. The A.E. Crandall Company in Alfred has just successfully gotten a grant to get a equipment washer for all our turnout gear, and that's going to be installed over the summer. And I think as things go down the road, all of that's important. But what concerns me too about too much emphasis on safety and you know uh, not fighting fires that aren't going to have any kind of change is that the people that make those rules are often not firefighters. Or if they are, they're my age. They're really old. Okay, and I think the people that make the rules have to pay attention to the fact that it is a huge high to go and fight a fire and knock it down with a team. Okay, it's all a big team thing, and if you've never done it, it's really hard for anybody else to understand how cool it is, how much fun it is. So, having said that, if we look at a car fire, a fully involved car, there is no rational reason at all to apply any kind of fire suppression technique to that car. It's going to get totaled. It'll go to the junkyard. The stuff that burns will just burn. They don't want that anyway. They're going to scrap it for the metal. But it's fun to knock down fires, even if it's a fire where there is no value in it. Okay, even if you know that car is going to be totaled, who doesn't like to knock down a car fire? Especially one with the tires going and popping and all that good stuff. It's really exciting. It's really fun. Okay, so it's hazardous. So it's stupid, right? It's definitely stupid if you're looking at a cost benefit analysis or a risk analysis from the point of view of somebody that crunches numbers and sits back and says, well, what should we do? What shouldn't we do? And doesn't weigh at all the fun and the training and the experience that you get even knocking down a stupid car fire. Um, those people, I think, can give us rules and regulations that in the end may have counterproductive outcomes. So, for instance, this idea that after you use 2 tanks, you have to take a break. Well, what's that going to do? If that rule is strictly enforced, people are going to try and cheat and not use their air so that they can continue to fight the fire because that's what we like to do. And so someone makes that kind of rule, and then chiefs try and enforce it and whatever, but they're not inside. And you're inside and you say, okay, I can fight this fire a little bit longer if I turn off my air, and it's pretty clean in here. I'll manage fine. And years ago, firefighters did put up with this all the time, and so then people might cheat. I'm not saying anyone I know would cheat, but I think that's a dumb rule. And I think that there's some other dumb rules if you don't weigh, especially with a volley squad. Okay, if you don't weigh the fact that the reason people do this is because it is a hoot. Okay, it's more fun than anything else one can do practically. And so, bottom line, I think first of all you should wear your SCBA, or you're going to be wearing one of these eventually, and clean your gear, and don't get cancer. Remember though that fire service is not the only way to get cancer. You can get it from lots of other bad behavior or just questionable behavior. And when you're old and my age and you're looking back and you say, what would I do again differently? And if you now have given up smoking and you think back, okay, maybe I should have given up smoking, I can understand that, right? I never would have given up the fire service. I don't expect anyone else to, and hopefully no one does. I think it's great. But overhaul, wear your mask. And that's my message for today. Okay, doke.